The late Queen Elizabeth's coffin makes its final trip to Buckingham Palace. The coffin arrived at the Royal Air Force Station Northolt from Scotland earlier tonight. It will then move to Westminster Hall tomorrow, where the Queen will lie in state for 4 days. Prime Minister Liz Truss and Defence Minister Ben Wallace, as well as a small group of military and civic figures, received the Royal Air Force aircraft. Hundreds of thousands of people have braved the wet weather and lined up outside Buckingham Palace in anticipation of the Queen's final homecoming. Well, for a little bit more on this, we're now joined by SABC News Correspondent in London, Giles Gibson. Giles, thanks very much indeed for joining us. A wet London at the moment, but this hasn't put off the mourners who want to show and pay their last respects.
That's right. It's a rainy, pretty dreary evening here in the British capital, but that perhaps matches this sombre occasion that we are seeing playing out right now. That plane carrying the casket of Queen Elizabeth II arriving at that airbase just outside the British capital, and it is now making its way into London, and its destination is Buckingham Palace, of course a place where the Queen spent so much of her life. She will, or her casket will spend the night in a room known as the Bow Room in Buckingham Palace. This is a room where the Queen actually has hosted many foreign dignitaries over the course of her 7 decades on the throne. And then in the morning, what we'll see eventually, or more in the afternoon, is that casket moving through the centre of London. It's not a long journey that it's got. It's going to go from Buckingham Palace to Westminster Hall in the Houses of Parliament. We're expecting it to take about 30 minutes, this procession, this ornate procession carrying the Queen's casket, where she will lie in state for 4 days in that ancient part of the Houses of Parliament.
This evening at Buckingham Palace, I would imagine that the staff that served her for so long will probably have their opportunity to pay their last respects. Is there anything else that might be happening at the palace this evening?
No, that's it. It's very much a private moment, really. Of course, we've seen so many of these events playing out in the public eye since we got the news of Queen Elizabeth's death just a few days ago. But this is certainly a private moment for the palace. We're going to see members of the royal household, people who, in some cases, have spent decades working for the royal family and working for the Queen herself. They will perhaps have a few minutes to pay their respects, to walk past the casket when it's in that room that I was mentioning inside the palace. There will also be members of the royal family present, but really this is one of the few moments in this entire process that's happening behind closed doors, really. And then, as I was saying, over the next 12 to 24 hours or so, we will see the casket once again in public, making its way through the streets of London. And that's when thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people will have the chance to file past that coffin to show their respect to the woman who spent so many years on the British throne.
If what happened in Edinburgh is anything to go by, one can only expect very long queues in the capital.
That's what we are expecting to see, and actually I can tell you that there are already a handful, not very many, maybe 25 or 30 people who have started queuing already, just waiting to get in the front of that queue to pay their respects inside Westminster Hall, that ancient part of the Houses of Parliament. I can also tell you that preparations are already underway for the state funeral, which of course is taking place on Monday next week, the 19th of September. If you had been a very early riser here in London, 4 a.m. local time, right in the heart of the city, you would have seen thousands of troops moving through the capital, up the Mall, right outside Buckingham Palace. And what they were doing was practicing, was getting ready. They were having their dress rehearsal, if you like, for that moment when the entire world will be watching the state funeral of Queen Elizabeth II taking place in Westminster Abbey. Of course, a place where so many of the pivotal moments of her life took place. Her coronation in 1953, just recently a memorial service for her late husband, Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, and now her state funeral.
There have been a number of events taking place simultaneously. The King being, I won't say coronated, but being recognised on the one hand, and of course memorials for the Queen at the same time. Where is the King now, and does he still have more engagements, or is the focus now on the late Queen?
Well, King Charles has spent so many of the last few days within meters of his mother's casket, walking behind the casket, for example, as it made its way through Edinburgh, the Scottish capital, before a service in a cathedral in Edinburgh. But actually, over the last 12 hours or so, we've seen something different. The Queen's casket remained in Scotland before, as we were mentioning earlier, making its way south to London. But King Charles III has actually been in Northern Ireland over the course of the day. He attended a memorial service there with the Queen Consort Camilla. And this was also a fascinating moment because, of course, for so many years over the troubles, the really difficult periods that we've seen in terms of along the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, the British monarchy, the Queen, the King, was a symbol of repression, perhaps for many Irish nationalists. But actually what we saw at some of the proceedings that took place in Belfast, in Northern Ireland, was members of Sinn Féin. Of course, this Irish nationalist party that for so many years its members would have despised members of the royal family. We saw elected members of Sinn Féin who are now part of the stalled government in Northern Ireland, the devolved government, taking part in that ceremony alongside King Charles III. And I have to say, for anybody who remembers the troubles, the really bad periods of the 1990s, that is a pretty extraordinary moment. That is a real demonstration of just how much things have changed. And of course, many people give Queen Elizabeth II some of the credit for helping to improve relations after so many troubled years.
The royal family, I guess, is now all together in London. We saw the Princess Royal by her mother's side throughout this journey from Balmoral all the way now back to London. What will we see from the other members of the royal family in the coming days?
Yeah, Princess Anne actually played a very interesting role in terms of walking behind the casket in Edinburgh, because in previous iterations of this, the rules were actually, if you can believe it, that women were not allowed to take part in that sort of thing. It would only have been the male members, the male senior members of the royal family taking part in that. But Princess Anne, of course, one of the Queen's children, did take part. And now we are seeing, as you mentioned, Princess Anne, King Charles, all of them returning from travels around the United Kingdom, returning to the British capital, to London, as we build up to the state funeral on the 19th of September.
There's been lots of speculation about the Fabulous Four, their appearance together. Have we seen anything since then, or was that a once-off?
In terms of appearing together, well, of course, we had that moment just a few days ago in Windsor when we saw Prince William and Prince Harry and their wives actually going on a walkabout, greeting members of the crowd. It was perceived by many of the British tabloids here, by much of the British press, as a show of unity from the princes. Of course, after so many newspaper reports, after so many damaging headlines talking about friction, talking about a rift in the wake of Prince Harry and Meghan moving over to California, moving over to the United States, and really getting rid of or ditching some of their royal duties. So there has been a lot of talk in recent days about the royal family. After so many sort of difficult moments, of course, those damaging headlines about Prince Andrew as well, just the royal family coming together. And actually in King Charles' inaugural speech, we saw him just a few lines, but trying to draw a line under some of those moments of friction and trying to bring the family together. as he takes over the throne from his late mother.
King Charles, how have people seen him? He seems to have stepped into the role and become very regal in his new position.
Yeah, there is actually some new polling out that shows that King Charles has had a real boost in terms of his popularity ratings since he has become king. There was a survey by YouGov which was conducted for the Times newspaper here in the UK. That showed that 63%, so almost, two-thirds of respondents to that survey said that King Charles would be a good king, that he would do a good job in this new role that he's taking on, and of course a role that he waited so many decades to take on. And that is a massive jump, that polling, in terms of some polling that was done only 6 months ago, back in March, when less than 50%, well under half of the respondents, said that they thought King Charles, or Prince Charles as he was then, would be a good monarch. So certainly these big set-piece moments, such as that first speech that he's given, such as those many moments that we've seen in terms of his walking behind the casket of his late mother, that appears to be really giving him a boost in terms of his popularity after so many years of questions, really, about whether he was capable of sort of reflecting, of achieving that same level of adoration, perhaps, or support from the British people that his mother had for so long.
Giles Gibson, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for that update. That's our correspondent in London there, giving us an update on the arrival of late Queen Elizabeth's coffin in the capital, London. It will spend the night at Buckingham Palace, and then tomorrow it will be arrive at Westminster under a procession which is expected to take about 30 minutes.